Get going. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today and to welcome our speaker, Dr. Alexander Rondeli, who is the president of the Georgetown of the Georgian Foundation for Strategic and International Studies. He's one of Georgia's best-known strategic thinkers, an academic, advisor to different governments. He's also trained as an expert in Iran and fluent in Persian. And has worked with the Georgian government and has run this think tank for a long time, and it's the prominent really think tank in Tbilisi. So we are delighted to have you here. Yesterday we had you at a bigger conference. Now we have a more intimate gathering to talk about Russia and the West and the South.
I'm not alone. Well, today's topic is quite intriguing and I think provocative also. And there are many points which one can discuss here, but I'll be not very eloquent. To be more concise, and I will rely on your questions, because during Q&A it's always easy to find details, right details, and to show some subtleties which always omit when you make this general, introduction. Well, is there anyone from former Soviet Union? Only. So, yeah. Well, post-Soviet space is called charmingly near abroad by our north of the border brothers. It's a very charming definition of former Soviet republics, because the authors of this definition, they still consider this post-Soviet space as their own backyard. And to them, it's very difficult to, after almost 22 years after the collapse of Soviet Union, to accept that former republics are not their own backyard anymore, formally. It's understandable, because when you develop as an empire for 5 centuries, and you even don't know where your borders are, because Russia always speaks about borders of other republics, but where are their borders? They always expand, and they always, they never stop in one. Now, collapse of the Soviet Union was a turning point in their history, when they overnight lost everything. They're traumatized, we understand it very well, and if I was Russian general or Russian officer, I would commit suicide with what happened to Russia, what happened to Soviet Union, which was Russian Empire also. And we understand this, but this paranoia, which is already more than 20 years, it damages everyone. First of all, themselves, Russians, because they still, instead of working on how to make their state a modern nation state, because it's multinational and multi-confessional society, they still dream about restoring old glory. And the most popular proverb now in Russia is, Russia has only 2 allies, army and navy. It's already time to forget it, It's time to think about functional state, which they have not. In 1917, they failed to create modern nation state, and they took Bolshevism and Bolshevik empire. In 1991, the same thing continued, Instead of taking this road towards modern nation statism, they started to jump from one place to another, and then finally, with Mr. Putin, they started to recollect their lands, as they call it, and trying to stand on their own feet. It's understandable that it's difficult after this terrible collapse, and with Russia is very specific, and in which I would say 95% of population does not matter which sex, which, masculine, feminine, what age, they believe that Russia has to be empire. Not maybe very, strong empire, but no, strong empire, strong state, strong country, but not strong state, because the strong state they believe is imperial state. And for neighbors, it's very difficult because neighbors want to develop on their own, and their former masters trying to suppress them. Russians are especially, when I say Russian government, but not only government, they are especially sensitive to anyone who appears on the horizon and wants to develop normal relations with former Soviet republics or something, They believe that this is, he is the intruder and he has no right to be in post-Soviet space. And some people speak about renewal of former great game, now with more players, because the classical great game was about Russia and Britain. But now in this new great game, some people believe it's regenerated not only Russia, and US is now a new player. Turkey, Iran also playing this role. And also new former Soviet republics are there. So it's maybe the new great game with more participants. And the most important new participant is the United States. So if you look at Russian strategic vision, a national security vision, we in Georgia always were very much concerned with it, to find out where we are there and what is our destiny, because they still define our future. And I was working for foreign ministry, and we were always working on what our neighbors think about us, what they are planning. It's absolutely clear, and especially it was before the war, but after the war it was already clear in their wording of President Medvedev, President Putin also. Yesterday it was said about it, that they believe that the former Soviet Union is their near abroad and their sphere of privileged interest. Sounds great, because I remember then when our top officials met Russian officials, the talk was always that they were saying that you have to understand, we have interests in Georgia, in South Caucasus. You have to understand that. Our answer was that we understand that you have interests and we are ready to discuss your legal interests. But in their reply, legal was always omitted. They were saying, we have interests and we will follow them. And you cannot stop us. And I will tell you even more. During the last meeting with Russian delegation, and it was happening, it was kind of second-track diplomacy. It was happening in our foundation, and because it's a rules of protocol rules that if it's in the institution when you are head of, when you are presiding. But I was presiding, but former Minister of Foreign Affairs was sitting with me, former ambassadors, one former ambassador to Russia, and also there was deputy minister official representing government, because it was informal but quite formal meeting. And the conversation was about that Georgia has to stop its pro-Western dreams. And the new Russian ambassador, Mr. Kovalenko, was there, and 5 men from Foreign Ministry of Russia, 2 directors of departments, and Mr. Kelly, I remember one name, maybe you know him. It's very polite, but very imperial also. And at the end of our conversation, when our foreign minister told them, well, if we stay where we are and not moving towards the West, where we are, just status quo, what would be Russia's reaction? And one said on charming Russian, I would say it in Russian, and then I will try to translate. Тогда Россия начала бы думать, как бы поспособствовать решению ваших проблем. It's fantastic. It's the upper class of diplomacy. Then Russia would start to think how it would be possible to help you in solving your problems. But second one was more eloquent. And he said, тогда вам не будет хуже. Then it will not be worse for you. It's war. Worse, what more? Economic blockade is in full swing. Everything is in practically Cold War. Хуже means war after that. And when they left, former Minister Menagarishvili asked us, what does it mean, guys? Does it mean war? No one protested. It was war. And it was, in many other cases, was the same. Even more. Yesterday it was mentioned during the conference that if Russia previously was very anti-NATO, and they never spoke loudly about EU as a bad institution, concerning, interests of former Soviet republics. But on private level, behind this, they were always telling us, for example, I can cite one of them, chief of their delegation. Те, кто становятся членами НАТО, членами Европейского Союза, эти земли навсегда потеряны для России. Поэтому мы не допустим, чтобы туда попали. So all lands which become part of EU are lost forever for Russia, and we will not let you go there. They never write it in newspapers, but they say. But after that, they are more loud about it. They speak about it quite openly. And EU is also bad thing, because absolutely clear that we are not idiots, despite the fact that they believe that we are idiots. We are not complete idiots. And we understand that Russia wants to recreate a kind of mini empire or medium empire, not with Marxism, Leninism, but with Russian imperialism as its core. And they understand that they cannot regenerate or resurrect as a great power without Ukraine, without Belarus, without South Caucasus, without Kazakhstan. Others are less important. And this is how to say, it's their imperative. They believe that this is the only way to survive. And it's understandable, because between EU and China, Russia without these republics would be a joke. And if I was Russian, I would do the same, maybe. But I'm fortunately not Russian, and unfortunately I'm Georgian. So difficult to say what is better. But and they try to follow this line and to subjugate you. And we try to resist. And then comes American, Russian, some say confrontation, but I don't think there is a confrontation, because if we look at post-Soviet space from the point of view of wrestling, which is very popular in our part of the world, and even in Russia also. America is wrestling with Russia there with one finger, this finger, and the Russians are wrestling with both hands. And still they are losing influence, because they have no idea. They cannot offer us anything. Only imperial yoke. And we are trying to escape it. And not only us, Ukrainians try to escape, Belarus trying to escape, everyone. So when you see that everyone tries to escape, you have to ask yourself, why people do it? Some people, some experts call Russia post-imperial state. It's not post-imperial. Some people call it trans-imperial. I think it's new imperial state, or at least trying to be new imperial. It's even worse, because your strategy has to be proportional to your capacities for today. If your strategy or strategic goals are not fitting in your capacities, then it becomes already, and then it becomes adventure. So Russia is trying to survive at the expense of its neighbors without offering them anything. For instance, if Russia is democratic, normal state, healthy, wealthy as we say, and is guarantor of our security, why we have to be bad with them? We have no zoological fear of Russians. We spent more than 200 years together. Our cultures are interwoven very, very strongly. And in general, you would not find more, I would say, sympathizing nation to Russians on their borders, no, excluding Slavonic nations. Georgians are more pro-Russian on the borders of Russia with other neighbors. Normal, you cannot find Georgian table. Georgian table is normally just the most frequent institution in our life when you come across. There is no Georgian table, even full with Georgian extreme nationalists, without singing Russian romances, Russian songs. Yeah. And sometimes I was witnessing when Russians who came for conference, twice they saw this kind of gathering, and they were then trying to understand, was it specially done for them or not? But then they saw that they just haphazardly were there at it, and was very much, impressed with it. It's normal, but as you know, security dilemma starts to work when you become independent. So despite our deep love towards Russia, we want to be independent. And the biggest mistake of Georgia is, and the biggest tragedy, the Georgians believe that they can be independent from Russia. The Russians are constantly telling us that you are idiots, it's impossible. You belong to us. You belong to us because we have common culture, common religion, everything is the same, and we love you. But they never say that they love their Georgia, not ours. And the problem is that they don't understand sometimes why we try to have our own independent policy. Why we do it? Because we cannot see anything good from them, and we want to develop as normal state. And now one point which makes our relationship with the West very clear, and with Russia. It's vulgarized, very simplified scheme or model. But we are multi-ethnic and multi-confessional society. The only way for Georgia to become a viable state is to become democracy. To become democratic state, to become modern, inclusive, democratic nation. Otherwise, we cannot balance interests of different ethnic groups, religious groups, and even social groups. So, for Georgia, strategic imperative is to become democracy. Can Georgia to become democracy under Russian umbrella? No, 99% no, even more than 100% no. Can you imagine Georgians Georgian pupils studying in Russian School of Democracy. Russians themselves do not know how to develop democracy. And also Russians are not interested in having Georgian democratic state, stable state. What for? They need military presence on our territory, nothing else. Military presence, because if they are on our land, they are on Armenian land, on Azeri land, on Ukrainian land, then they project power outside. Without it, they cannot project such a big power. It's very simple, everything. And many people try to understand subtleties of their strategic thinking. Nothing, only this understanding of strategic depth, they call it glubina obrony, to have, as far as possible, a real line of defense. Because a paranoidal fear of someone will come. But now they know that no one will come. But they use this paranoidal fear as their paradigm, telling that you can't understand. You cannot understand. We are trying to defend from the south. Muslims are coming, these are coming. But if you live in the world where everyone is coming to destroy you, you have to change your policy to do something. So this strategic depth is the mainstay of their vision. And military, despite the fact that today everyone says that military have no say there, and they did not have say in the 90s. I know from Russian colleagues, whom I respect very much, that the last say was always military. When they were discussing, government was discussing what Russian foreign policy. And military were saying, we have to be on the southern slopes of the Caucasus. We have to stay in Georgia. Otherwise, we cannot guarantee Russia's defense from the south. And it means that they do not ask you, they want to be on your territory. It's why they say we have interests on your territory. We do not care what you think. You have to give up to us, because Russia is important, Georgia is small, and you have no other way. And everyone who wants to help you is anti-Russian, and it's Americans, they buy you, but once more going back to this model, which in a very simple and vulgarized way I offered you. What choice we have if we want to become democracy? Our choice is to join Europe, to join NATO, and to be within among the civilized normal nations of Europe, to which we believe that we belong. It's myth, but this myth is very important. If you believe that you are European also. At least it drives you in the right direction. So there is strategic imperative for Georgia to be with the West. Otherwise, we will not survive. And all this blah, blah, blah about, Saakashvili's bad temper, the psychological, investigations and Freudists, and it's all nonsense, because reality is Russians want to stay in Georgia, militarily to stay. And it's all very simple. Can Georgians blame themselves for this? Yes, definitely. Because we know that there is, you cannot blame only one side. We have to blame ourselves for our mistakes, strategic mistakes, miscalculations, our attempts to irritate Russians sometimes more than it's necessary. But it's so nice when you irritate them, because. And I will give you one example. We are now extremely anti-American because of one reason. According to Levada Center, surveys which are conducted twice or 2 times per year, and also every year, there is always one topic which the Levada Center surveys show: Russian attitude towards different nations. And one question is always formulated: which is the most hostile nation towards Russia? or which is the most dangerous nation for Russia. We were getting always first place during the last 10, 12 years from 2005, 2006. We were among three first. Great, you know, world champions. And before the war it started, and until this year, we were number one. The US was number two. And now US became number one and we're number two. And this is disaster, you know, because it was the place which we always had. And you have everything. Why you are depriving us of this feeling? You know? And our population doesn't know it because many people do not read newspapers, but elite knows it, and we are very unhappy with this, with Americans. So now we are number two among enemies, and slowly we will go down maybe a bit, but we will be among first five or first four. Now you can imagine the level of brainwashing of this great nation north of the border. So how you have to brainwash, to be brainwashed, to write that the most dangerous and most hostile nation is Georgia for you, and then America. It's paranoia already, and it's very long time paranoia. It's sometimes difficult to explain. Now if we look to our friends in Europe and in the United States, most people in the United States, including Congress and Senate, they don't know where Georgia is located. And sometimes, you know, Russian colleagues tell us, don't you think that Americans think about it? No one knows about you. You are so arrogant. And I will tell you also, we really are the most arrogant small provincial nation in the world. So Russians always tell us, with your arrogance, do you think anyone cares about you? Well, some of us still believe that we are on the map, in the middle of the map, but we understand it. We understand that no one knows about it in this country. I will tell you, in the 90s, I once got a letter which was sent to Georgia, state of Georgia. And I wrote over it, sorry, it's post-Soviet Georgia, this letter. And then I went to our post office and we put Georgian post stamps and send it. And I can imagine this guy was saying, "Oh, son of a bitch," because why? It was very important letter. It was clear, so he could not get it only via Georgia. It happened to me, but my friends say that there were some cases like that. So we really understand that. Sometimes we have people who come and say, "Ah, wonderful country," but they have no idea what this Georgia is. Only professionals know. Only professionals know. So your knowledge of post-Soviet space in Georgia, as I expect, is much higher than the ordinary top-level American taking decisions, you know. Absolutely. So we learned it that no one knows about it. And even in Europe, they know about Georgia. It's fragmentary knowledge. It's connected with Stalin, unfortunately. Some remember that Stalin was Georgian, and even Beria was Georgian. My God, such a shame. It's much better to have Mozart as your predecessor and Beethoven instead of these two, but nothing to do. Nothing to do. You have to deal with your past. And Europe is, I will tell you how Europe looks, how Russia looks at Europe. They say, Europe, these fat cats, are they capable of anything? Do you rely on them? We say Europe is, oh, come on, who are they? No one. They are no one, we buy them. And we can do it. They have no power. Oh, when it comes to America, yes, Americans are something, but Europe, who are they? So when they tell us, do you rely on them? They will sell you immediately. Well, we understand that in this part of the world, all over the world, interests play an important role. Unfortunately, we will talk about it, while values and interest, how they are mixed in our foreign policy, American foreign policy and European. And how Russians are trying to sell this idea that interests are more important than values. And we always say that what we rely on Europe, we rely on the United States, but we understand that there are limits of their interests also. If we were Kuwait, then it's clear everything. If we had 20 billion barrels of oil on our territory, but maybe it would be even worse, who knows. So we come to this important vision of Russia, of Russian leadership. Why they believe that Westerners must not come to their backyard. They say that, look, it's our backyard, but we will call it, this is the sphere of our privileged interests. And let's divide the world on this interest. We do not care what you do in your hemisphere or your sphere of influence. But you have to let us do whatever we want in our sphere of interest. Because we have interests here, and you have interests there. Let's base our relationship on this understanding, common understanding. This is my sphere of interest, this is your sphere of interest. But does it mean, it means that international security has to be based on the balance of interests. But interests are temporary, changeable, tradable, and contextual. Can we base, Georgia does not decide it, but big states which decided, can they base international security only on interests instead of in balance of interests, or on values also? Values, if we destroy values, then nothing remains. And Russian approach during the war with Georgia, during this fight, it's after this, and before, but after it was absolutely clear, was that it's our part of the world, don't mix with up here. Let us do whatever we want here. We do not care about your doing in different places. It's not accepted officially by the West. By de facto, we feel that no one wants to accept it, no one wants to say that, you know, it's so, but de facto they say, you know, for example, Danish ambassador of European Commission in Georgia, Dane, representative of a small nation which was conquered by others, tells me, Alex, why you irritate Russians? You have to be nice to them. You have to be nice to them. I said, Ambassador, do you think that what we have to do? They are trying to take us back. No, why you think so? They are well, they are good friends of you. You have to be nice. This ambassador of European Commission tells me in Tbilisi that I have to be nice to, but I am telling him that, look, we are in the cage with polar bear, and he is, you know, barking at us, or, you know, and biting us, and you are telling us, be nice to the doggy, be nice to the doggy. We are asking you to open the cage and let us out. He said, no, 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 you Georgians complicate because you are arrogant. How we complicate it? I cannot imagine a more simple situation when you are in the cage with polar bear. And they tell you, be nice to him, you know, it's a great guy. So it's absolutely clear now that one country is not bad, but they want to be as they were before. And they want to control you. Others understand that it's bad, but they are not doing too much to stop them. And they tell us, you know, you have to use diplomacy and be nice to them, and also develop democracy. If you develop democracy, we can mobilize our people to defend you. But this defense would be, as it is, economic, political, moral. It's very important. And what we are struggling for, not struggling for having American military support. We understand that it's fantasy, you know. Only lunatic can think about it. Americans come and fight for us there. But what we want is to be on radar screen. And you or others to remember that we are a frontline state trying to survive. And, you know, do we deserve to survive? Like every other nation. Despite our extreme arrogance, you know, we understand that we have no more rights than others. Just to survive and have possibility to develop normally. We even have strategic supremacy over many of our neighbors. We offer our territory for pipelines, roads, transit, everything. We do not ask anyone anything. And then comes conversation about normalizing relations with Russia. And I always say the same. To normalize means to have normal relations. But what are normal relations? For Kremlin, and Kremlin still exists despite the fact that everyone was saying after the collapse of Soviet Union that Kremlinology is dead. It must not be dead. It must not be dead. Kremlin is Kremlin still. So one just say that we have to survive this Moscow approach with the support of the West. And Western support is to stop Russia using international law, using moral categories, using, you know, all possible weapons except real military weapons. And we're asking, begging, you know, the West to help us, but sometimes people forget that we are in the frontline state and trying to survive. It's very simple what we have. So Europe is trying to develop its influence in former Soviet Union, but in a way not to irritate Russia. Or for example, I would give you a classical example. Before NATO summit in Bucharest, government of Georgia asked us, a mixed group of NGO people and government, to go to 4 capitals, London, Paris, The Hague, and Berlin, to talk to them to see what is the vision. And no, Berlin is understandable, everything. Paris also understandable. London was more better. And The Hague, small Dutch nation, hard-working, based on values and principles, exemplary nation. And what their representatives, the foreign ministry, tell us, I will not give you the names. Are you normal? Can you imagine that we, after signing such an important gas contract with Russia, will support you? It's naive. The whole conversation was that. What you're asking us? We signed favorable gas contract with Russia, and you expect us to be on your side? We went home and told our government that we are sold. But they say we have to try still, you know. Georgian arrogance has no limits. We still try to knock at the doors of NATO, on the doors of NATO, EU, and we will we will achieve what we want. Because if we stop, there is no chance. We have to continue this. And it looks sometimes like we are acting as lunatics, but there is no other way for us. Our survival is to be part of Europe. And in this renewed great game between US, Europe, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, even China now is there, and Iran also is there, Turkey is there. We just defend our interests. It's very difficult because we have no power, but we have moral power. And we beg others to support us on moral base. But morality and international politics are not very frequently together. So despite the fact that everyone says that realism is obsolete, realism, if you scratch international relations, realism is there, realpolitik is there, unfortunately. And in this realpolitik, small countries are trying to survive with the same intention and with the same intensity like it was before, with more chances to survive, but sometimes they are amputated and survive as invalids. It's like Georgia is today. So it was just my introduction to questions and answers. You know, I just gave you the general picture, how we see it, how we look at it, and now we can go to details. And I have some fantastic statements by Russian experts about Georgia, and it will kill you. But I try to keep it, you know, if I read what they are saying. It's hint also.
So irrespective, though, of Russia, let's go irrespective. What is Georgia doing itself internally to align itself with the European Union? Democratic reform, human rights reform. And I say irrespective of Russia because there's plenty of examples of states that have had enormous Russian pressure on them not to join the EU who have successfully done so. So it's possible. So what is Georgia doing internally?
Apart from Baltics,
you could look at,
only Baltics.
I mean, Serbia is going toward the European Union. You could look at
Serbia is not bordering Russia.
Romania.
And Serbia was not part of Soviet Union.
Okay, well, in the influence. So what's
Bulgaria and Romania are, to be sincere, maybe a bit worse than Georgia, and from that point of view, maybe a bit, because they also have their problems, serious problems. Georgia's problem is $3,200 per capita GDP. It's a very poor state now. But you cannot tell Georgians that they are poor, because arrogance kills, you know. They say, no, we are not poor. But it's a very poor state. And without economic development, without employment, without better business, we understand it. We want to join Europe, but we know it would not happen tomorrow and after tomorrow. In reality, I would say it's 20, 25 years if we work hard and effectively. But what we say is that we have to be given this possibility. Our northern neighbor creates problems for us constantly. We feel this pressure. And because of it, you know, because of it, democracy is developing not well in Georgia. Because any Georgian government, despite all the statements, has to think about security. And security is impossible without centralization if you are not still democratic state. And the problem is that when you are poor state and you are amputated, you know, your body is amputated by your neighbor, which every day tells you, and I will tell you what they tell you, then you have to think about how to secure, how to centralize, how to control everything. And what happened to Saakashvili? His many mistakes were not because he was out of his mind, because he was obliged to be in control. Mostly, many mistakes were because of that. And we have to just develop democratically, as to do our best, you know. But it takes time, we know it. Now I will, obviously, I had it for dessert, but You want it as a main dish. Well, look, when you read these kind of things, how do you think? Do you think very secure? Yeah. Yeah. Before the war, for example. Before the war. Russia's ambassador Kovalenko in Tbilisi, February 6, 2007, publicly called on Georgia to adopt a status of neutrality in its foreign policy. He implied that Georgia might definitely lose both breakaway regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, unless it desisted from its efforts to join NATO. Ambassador says it. Russia's envoy to NATO, Dmitry Rogozin, very notorious person, was perfectly frank. He told Reuters on March 11, 2008, as soon as Georgia gets some kind of prospect from Washington of NATO membership, the next day the process of real secession of these two territories from Georgia will begin. On March 21, 2007, in a speech to the Russian Duma, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov referred to Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Transnistria as republics, not long after his ministry had begun to refer to those regions' leaders as presidents in official documents. In the beginning of 2006, Gennady Bukayev, assistant to the chairman of the Russian government, Mikhail Fratkov, declared it at the Joint Assembly of North and South Ossetian governments, Joint Assembly of North and South Ossetian governments. And Russians still can consider Georgia, South Ossetia part of Georgia, that the Russian leadership had made a decision about the annexation of South Ossetia. Then I will give you what their experts say. And you will see that what we have to do is to survive still. Mikhail Alexandrov, an expert in the pro-government, non-governmental organization, the Commonwealth of Independent States Institute, you know this notorious place. Our ideology and strategy has to be the following: to reconstitute historical Russia from four republics, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. This is a civilizational nucleus which has to be transformed into one entity, one state. Special attention must be paid to Georgia. It must be divided into several statelets or semi-statelets, and Russia has to promote this process. Then Alexei,
When did you say that?
it was 2008. Alexei Vashchenko, respected not by many but still by some, Russian military expert, declared that the dismemberment of Georgia is a political necessity. Then he went on, Georgia is a cork in the bottleneck, and the bigger part of Georgia, which is left after the Russian attack in 2008, must be dismembered as soon as possible. Even among the younger generation of Russian pundits, we hear the same message. Boris Borisov, a so-called Derzhavnik, a supporter of Russian imperial aspirations, writes, Georgia must be desovereignized and annihilated as a subject of international law. This is the main task of Russia in the Caucasus. He states further that in the post-Soviet space, only those regimes can be considered legitimate ones, which are friendly to Russia. Others must be liquidated and replaced. The best humanitarian assistance to the Georgian nation from Russia would be the destruction of its centuries-old statehood. Thank you very much indeed. Great. Even Mr. Markedonov, who here is, I consider him more moderate in comparison with these guys. At least he hides his ideas. He says that from the beginning of the disintegration of USSR, Georgia's integrity has been fictitious. Yeah, it's understandable. They speak about it, about Ukraine, but Russia's territorial integrity is also fictitious without Russian power. If they stop FSB operations, and the army, this will disintegrate also Russia. So there are many things like that, but I think it's enough to show you that we operate in a space where we are told that You will not survive. We will destroy you. And because of that, even democratic development is hindered, let alone economic one. People come frequently from different countries, and it's a small country, so they cannot, our foundation is like, I always joke, like unknown soldier's grave. Everyone comes to us, no, fortunately without flowers so far. So, and when they come, you know, when a big businessman comes, he tells me, will Russian tanks come here? I say, even if they come, they will not take your land and your property. He said, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. So you are constantly under this fear of something happens, or they will destroy or overthrow our government, or they come and their tanks are 40 kilometers from Tbilisi. I do not say that we have to blame Russia for everything. We are fighting on two fronts. One is our own mentality and backwardness, and we are not always victorious on this front, unfortunately. And second front is Russia, and we are losing on both. So we have to win at least on one. And now we're turning back to our own problems and trying to improve our performance. First of all, economic. Democratic performance is really much better than it was. And last two elections are good confirmation of that. Now problem is economy, serious problem, and we need to do our best to improve, because when Estonia, former Soviet Republic, they were always on the first place, even in Soviet Union, but they are more than $16,000 per capita GDP. We are 3,200. It's a big difference. So I don't know how I answered your question, but we already understand our problems very well, and we know how difficult it is to solve them. But we do what we can.
My name is Sultan. I'm an undergraduate student here in the School of Foreign Service. My question relates back to your...
You must be Kazakh.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so I was going to say he is from the former Soviet space, but he came in after you began speaking.
My question was, you said that Georgia has the moral power and that Russia takes the United States much more seriously. And knowing the bilateral tension between Russia and the United States, how is the Georgian leadership convincing the American president and American leadership to move Georgia up its agenda or priority? Because it seems like the United States has its own issues to worry about, and how are you guys persuading the Americans to say, it's like, don't forget about us, keep us on the radar? Thank you.
No, to be very sincere, unfortunately, after the war, we are under the radar screen, not on the radar. And the problem of our foreign policy is to revive interest towards Georgia. It's a very difficult task. I do not see, at the moment, I do not see any chance to improve it, but we have no other way. We have to do something. Once more to fight with Russians. How? Yeah, but they are ready, but we are not ready this time. I think our diplomacy has to do it, but our new leadership, which is now in the process of forming, very soon will understand that we have to work seriously here. But when you have leadership which speaks about bad practice of using lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and why previous government spent so much money on lobbyists. But one of the powerful instruments of foreign policy for a small state is lobbyism. I think they themselves very soon will understand that they have to spend a lot of money on lobby here, because otherwise you cannot be on the radar screen. It will change soon, because reality always dictates everything. Unfortunately, now we are more concerned with internal problems inside Georgia, and this is also one of the reasons why we are not on the radar screen. But sometimes it's better not to be on the radar screen, because when many news come from one country, sometimes bad news. reporters love bad news. When I see that many reporters come to Georgia, it's like you feel when these ravens are in the, over the battlefield. Once one BBC, very known anchorman, told me, Alex, you have to produce more wars because we come here, we do, people love it, Look at Chechens, they say.
Send them to Israel.
Yeah, they love it. But it's maybe better that we are but we have to be on the radar screen of foreign governments because otherwise we will not survive. Thank you for the question.
Sorry, I'll ask Helen. Yeah.
What would you say about the state of Russian language in Georgia, especially among the young people? I mean, we keep hearing that among the youth of Georgia, the choice is English, not Russian anymore, and that fluency has gone down. Do you think that Georgian young people need to stop rejecting Russian in order to maintain normal relations, or do you think this is over-reported and this actually isn't happening?
It's mostly over-reported, mostly. One point is you have to know. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many Russians left Georgia. But not only Russians, Georgians who spoke Russian more. For example, my best friend, physicist, he left. Georgian, Khancheli, his family name, but his mother Russian. He told me, Alex, what I will hear, physics will not be priority of Georgia. So we lost a lot of people. But we also lost many who were, there were many Russians who were families of military who were serving there. Their relatives, people who, and they tried to go to Russia because they thought about the educational possibilities for their children. And also economic situation was terrible in Georgia, terrible. It's difficult to imagine what we went through. So number of Russian-speaking people was reduced. Because of that, many Russian schools were closed, many. And some schools were done, combined, Russian and Georgia. One section Russian, one section Georgia. So it depends. If you have Russian-speaking population in Georgia on your territory, you have Russian schools there, according to number of population, because it's not prohibited, not at all. Then Russian is taught in the Georgian schools as one of the foreign languages. But it's absolutely clear that most of the population wants to know English. Because Georgia is a free country, you can go wherever you want. Many people come, businesses and everything, and they speak Russian, but they want to know English also. And during President Saakashvili, these efforts were very strong, because he brought 1,000 English speakers from abroad, and they were distributed in different schools of Georgia, in western Georgia, in eastern Georgia, in the big villages also. They were living there and talking, teaching English. 500 was coming, beginning of the year, 500 another year. And it was propagated in Russia as, anti-Russian, zoological, this. It's normal. If you go to Sweden or the Netherlands, everyone speaks English. They know English better sometimes than their own language. It's normal for small nation.
Better than Americans.
No, better than many Americans, yeah. But for Georgia, lingua franca is still Russian, because we talk to our minorities, some who do not speak Georgian. Some of them speak very well, but some not. We speak with them in Russian, with most of Armenian minority in Javakheti, but in Tbilisi, Armenians know Georgian very well. With many Azeri people we speak in Russian, but they also don't know Russian. I have problems with Javakheti. We have one project there. When we go there, very frequently we cannot find among youngsters people who know Russian properly. And to lecture on Russian, they say, In Russian they say, я вас не понимаю. I don't know Armenian, what I can do. So this problem is everywhere in former Soviet Union. That Russian is going down, slowly, but going down. I speak Russian well, and I write Russian well properly. Despite the fact I never went to Russian school, because my mother was Russian speaking. She was born in St. Petersburg, and her Georgian was with heavy Russian accent, and she was always saying, I'm invalid in this. I don't want to have another invalid in my family. And when my father said, maybe he goes, my older brother went to Georgian school, kindergarten. And my father said, maybe we send Alex there. My mother said, you betraying your nation. You have one invalid at home, and now you have to another one. So I went to Georgian, everything Georgian. But I know Russian, I write properly, and you know, the biggest compliment you can get is when Russians tell you that you speak so well in Russian. But it's also very important, if you know Soviet Union a bit, you have to know this, that Russians always tease people who cannot speak properly Russian. It's understandable. Georgian has no masculine and feminine. And for Georgian, if you study Russian, твой мама и твоя папа. And when the guy opens mouth and says that, after that he's idiot. And they always joke about Georgians in that way, because it's different language, absolutely. And also accent, heavy accent. And they are always irritated, because our accent is, Georgian throat is different. And it's one of the reasons why there are always anecdotes about us and so on.
Yeah. Professor Rondeli, you mentioned the tension between values and concrete interests. But if you take these texts that you read out loud, and actually Professor Stent and Avi Norman, we were all in Tbilisi in the same period in March and April. Russian officials were being very clear about if you join NATO and if also if the U.S. recognizes Kosovo. I mean, they were saying in the room there, if this happens, they said there goes Abkhazia and South Ossetia and maybe Karabakh. And like these statements you brought make it so clear what we heard there. Well, you can say at a normative level maybe that's not right, it's not their choice, right? But is there also some responsibility for Tbilisi and Washington not listening when they were very clear about what they were going to do, and perhaps should have crafted this NATO membership in a different way? I mean, the idea that in principle you will get membership, but 2 years later, that's like if you have very nice property in your house and you tell your neighbor in 2 weeks I'm buying a Rottweiler, but you let him know that for 2 weeks the Rottweiler isn't there. It's a little... The
Rottweiler is mildly saying.
To compare to NATO? So, I mean, is there also responsibility on the, Washington recognizes Kosovo complete violation with the modus vivendi they had set up with Russia in terms of smaller states within the republics, the way it was crafted with 2 years, or you should live by your
Because
values?
You mentioned Kosovo, I will go back to Kosovo for a while, and then President Putin told President Saakashvili openly during one of the meetings. Saakashvili always says it openly, and no one protested. That as soon as Mikhail Nikolaevich, as soon as Americans recognize Kosovo, we will take symmetrical measures. It will touch upon your country, but not you personally. Thank you. Wonderful statement. And many other cases, they were always saying, if they do that, we have to do it. Because for Russians, it's very important to, first of all, to show that they are on the same level as Americans. They still operate in the world in which there are two superpowers. But at the same time, they know that they have to be respected. So if they do not do the same as Americans do, or do not bluff as Americans, because Americans do, but they bluff, then they will lose their superpower status. And second, it's wonderful masquerade, to do your job, to get what you want. They wanted to be on Georgian territory. Now they are. And one moment also, which I omitted, and it will make clear everything. But before I will answer Brenda. Now NATO summit is coming. NATO summit in Britain. No, it's not big secret that Georgia expects something there. But it's not secret also that we know that we will not get too much because of Russia. And because of some moments connected with our amputation of our territory and so on and so on. But still, there is a possibility to craft something. But main reason is Russia. Everyone knows it. So now NATO and main countries within NATO are starting to already working to find solution. What to do? What kind of wording has to be there? Everyone understands that after 5 years after the war, the wording after this Bucharest summit, it's the same wording that Georgia will be in NATO. It's not enough, especially that we practically have map without having map officially. We have this annual annual program, national, which is done every year very well. All reforms are done, so practically we accomplished what NATO wanted from us. So practically it's map, but they're afraid to call it map, membership action plan, not to irritate Russia. So now they're working what to find, what to craft new one. But to invent something new, it's not good. You have to follow already, same way as others went through. But problem is that the elite understands everything. But what you have to do with our population, last survey, 79% voted for NATO. 79. After the war was 62. If we get nothing, these dynamics will change. You cannot play with people's attitudes. You cannot play, because if you lose the momentum, then... So we tell our Western friends that, look, and they say we are now working on that. And then going back to Russian interests toward Georgia. Unfortunately, not many people speak about it, and I think it's our weak point of our propaganda. I always tell my colleagues, why you never discuss it openly? It's not written, even. From the very beginning, it was absolutely necessary to have a so-called frame agreement between neighbors. You know, who study international relations, that there is so-called frame agreement, Рамочное соглашение. You sign this frame agreement, which is basic agreement about good neighborly relations, about friendship and so on. After that, you develop other things. Isn't it strange that Russia, such a powerful country, failed to have this Рамочное соглашение with small Georgia? That Georgia failed to have with Russia, it's understandable, but Russia is such a formidable country, But why? We have with Turkey, we have with Azerbaijan, with Armenia, with everyone. Because from the very beginning, there were, I will tell you exactly, I will quote the people. President Yeltsin's administration, who were responsible for that, they say, we cannot bring this text, the standard text, to Russian Duma because it will not pass. But what is this text? The first article is clauses. Signing parties respect each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and borders. They say that Russian Duma will not accept it. So from the very beginning, this great country tells you that our parliament will not recognize you as independent state. We are members of NATO. And you say that they recognize our territory, but our parliament will not do it. So what we have to do, it's interesting, it's only Russians can do. It's Kremlin I say, not Russians, Kremlin. It's their games. And they say then we have to put some clauses there which will balance this first. And then Russian Duma will swallow it. And these sweeteners which we had to add are, first, we are strategic partners, Georgia and Russia. Not very nice prospect, but we agreed. And I was working for foreign ministry for many years, and I know exactly the text. And second clause, which was very charming also, Russia has special rights in conflict regions of Georgia. Even Vanuatu, which is sinking, would not sign this kind of document. It's breaching of sovereignty. And we said, no, it's impossible. Now they are there. They fulfilled what they wanted. And the third one they wanted, third clause one at the end. Signing parties take responsibility not to deploy military and military infrastructure of the third countries on their respective territories. We said, maybe we replace the third countries with foreign troops. They say, no, we are not foreign. We are not foreign, you are not foreign for us. This is the great game, you know. But it's not great game, it's just Russian game. Russian roulette for Georgia, I call it. If you say yes, they will kill you. If you say no, they will kill you twice, so nothing. And Georgian government said, no, we will not sign it. When President Yeltsin went to another, then Putin came, and when Mr. Saakashvili went first time to Moscow, he told Putin that you are my role model, you are exemplary leader of Russia, and we learn from you, and we want to be like you. And even this gangster smiled a bit. It was fantastic to see Putin smiling a bit. But he hated Saakashvili from the very beginning because he had his file on his table. And then they started to talk, we have to improve our relations, everything was mistake. And then the idea of new commissions have to be created to work on the text of this. And I was in foreign ministry when the information came, and we told each other, let's see what happens. Will they take it out? Everyone said no, they will not change anything. After 1 month or two, when the commission met once or twice, the same strategic partnership, special rights of Russia in conflicting zones, and responsibility not to deploy any third countries. We said no. This is what they wanted. So the all foreign policy of Russia, all policy of Russia towards Georgia is based on that. Now they fulfilled this most important. They are in these territories. They have not special rights. They are there already without any special rights. And now they want the third one. When Georgia turns, sorry for my French, but when they talk to us, they say, not turn your back, they turn your ass to the West. Sorry for my French. En jeu it starts in Russia. Directly, they say. Because when we talk vis-a-vis, it's different conversation. And we don't want to turn our back to the West. And they will put pressure on us more and more, more and more. It's why we need understanding from the West and support and so on.
Well, and I don't know whether you've noticed, but interestingly yesterday, Forbes magazine ranked the most powerful people in the world, and Mr. Putin is now #1 and Mr. Obama is #2. I
Incredible.
gather, I'm not sure what the means of measuring this is, but it has to do with how much authority you have within your own country.
Wow.
So for whatever reason, that's it. But I'm sure that they're smiling in the Kremlin when they look at that. Please join me in thanking Professor Rondeli for a very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.